everyone, and welcome to Making the Rounds. As you can tell by my compatriots' very delightful, and I'm not sure what we would call it. There's
Rotoscoped
been
face.
some illnesses, so that's why this episode's a bit late. But we're going to be talking about the finals of EU versus NA, and kind of how that shook out for Rift Rivals, and North America is now the best region. Woo!
Yes. Our former coworker Travis Gafford knew it all along.
Yes.
Uh,
I'm sure he will have a victory lap when we do League Weekly tomorrow.
he'll probably run around his apartment or something.
No
I
one
hope he
wants to
actually
see
does
that.
that now.
Okay.
Hilarious image. Anyway,
So, that brings us to the first order of business, though, which is NA, really the second best region in the world now, or something like this.
so my answer for this is pretty much going to be no. But again, I'm someone who will not give the win to the entire region, despite the fact that that's what this setup was about.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think that TSM was the best performing team at this tournament? Yes, by kind of a significant margin, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that was a bit unexpected to me. I didn't expect them to come to this tournament and kind of be able to play their very comfortable, because again, I don't think we saw much new out of TSM at this tournament, but I think that Bjergsen played really well. I think that they had a really good understanding of what works for their team specifically, and I mean, self-awareness goes a long way, and they executed their a very comfortable style for them. So I think that's what really impressed me about TSM, was that they were able to just kind of come in, play their style, and do really well. It made me, I guess, that part made me kind of happy. Now, the flip side of that is, did the play style of a lot of their teams they were going up against have something to do with that? Definitely yes. So, I don't even know how much this means for TSM come the end of the split, when they, most likely go to the World Championship, barring some sort of horrific, I don't even think they can they even miss Worlds now? It's highly unlikely, because I'm just going to assume that they'll be going.
I mean, they can if they don't place well in playoffs.
Yeah.
And
I
end
think
up in
it's
Gauntlet, but yeah.
Yeah, it's mathematically slim that because of their circuit points from spring. So, I think that
confirmed to go to. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was like, wait, can they?
No, it's really funny
so...
though, because Vizichachi, even though you all finished second, he's like, I think it's gonna be hard for us to go to Worlds. Jesus, this tournament really destroyed you guys, didn't it? Anyway, go ahead.
At least they're thinking ahead. Anyway, so as for how much this means, or how much it's the strength of the region, I think what we saw, we talked about this on previous videos, but the way that the European teams at this event treated jungle mid versus the way that the North American teams used their jungle mid was ultimately a huge deciding factor in the results, and that is again something that jives really well with the way TSM like to play. Sorry, my voice is like fading. I think that I'd be like, it makes me curious to think how other teams from North America would have performed, since these were not technically the top teams outside of TSM. I believe is second now. And
Yeah, was really weird for me because it feels like I wouldn't say Immortals and CLG have like this insane jungle mid synergy, right? Like compared to, I would say that Cloud9 and TSM both have much better understanding of how to do that, and P1 wasn't. I mean, yeah, P1 was really weird because they just kind of abused the openings and river control that the teams had. So it was a little bit different from the C9 TSM situations, but I'm not even sure that CLG and IMT would have like the same setup. I thought it was really interesting that Quickshot kept being so surprised by how many blue buffs TSM were denied. I was denied.
I saw that and I was like, but that's all they do.
Anyone who watches TSM games can figure out that that's like their MO. They would much rather make sure you don't have blue buff than they get their own blue buff because they don't want you to be able to perma push against them.
Also, earlier in that game, I'm pretty sure UOL did steal TSM's blue buff. So that was really entertaining.
And it's really funny because, like, I feel like UOL had that figured out because when you look at the IEM games, they were guarding their blue buffs really well and everything else. I think it comes down to the way Exile has been, and people blame Xerxes. It's really annoying and kind of irksome to me that Vedius at the end of the broadcast, and yes, I am calling Vedius out by name, god damn it, Vedius.
Wow.
I'll even at you on Twitter. That they're saying now that Xerxes' jungle pool is harmful to Unicorns of Love, and he wants to see Xerxes on some aggressive junglers that can gank mid and interfere with mid and get mid ahead. And I'm just like, you realize that last year your narrative was that move is shit because he gives up his jungles because he's always doing these like super risky ganks mid, right? Like, you realize that you were criticizing the jungler, and maybe it's not the jungler. No, I think though Exile last split was doing really well to study mid lane matchups, and he had a much better grasp on like what champions were good. His pool was much more in vogue and everything else, and he seems to have fallen out of, like, his trades aren't as strong. He doesn't always understand when he can get CS and when he's not going to get punished in matchups, and he has a very limited pool of matchups that he is comfortable in. And I think that that's a big issue, is that maybe either the staff or he's just not able to learn or study matchups as well right now. And I think that that's something that I would look at before I would blame Xerxes, because Xerxes just has a very different method of solving it than Move did. But when Move did it, right, they got super far ahead. Move was able to help them protect the blue buff, and even deny TSM's blue buff. So I don't really understand. So again, and it's just, again, the mid jungle worked together much better at that point. So to me, I think that that's definitely what we come down to. I still think that if you're not just giving TSM 3 winning lanes, they have trouble dividing the map really hard.
Yeah, they do.
Still.
And I mean, we still saw, so like in terms of even TSM's laners themselves, we did see a lot of the same problems that, for example, Hanser has been having this split, where, again, he overextends in lane and gets punished for it. And that can be really costly if TSM, especially if TSM doesn't have pushing lanes in mid and bot. And
jungle,
I mean,
top synergy is really bad in EU too. Like, the teams with the best jungle top synergy are like H2K and Vitality, so
Yeah,
Yay.
it's that I think that's where you really saw Phoenix One succeed
Hmm.
is Mike Young did put a lot of focus in top lane. And another reason, I mean, I can't say I think I think he had a really good performance. Probably one of his better ones that we've seen out of him in like a year, at least a year. So that automatically meant that Arrow and Xpecial were either drawing pressure or generally keeping their lane pushed, or like in the case of the Twitch, they were playing it safe enough that Mike Young really didn't have to worry about them, and
Right.
then Ryu was always pushing. So um, I'm trying to think of jungle because like again the two top teams like or who people kind of consider including TSM, so I guess like three top teams, but the two teams that didn't come, it's also interesting because they're still figuring out their jungle top
Hmm.
synergy, and a large reason of that is because they, not so coincidentally, swapped junglers between those two specific teams. So um, it's interesting to think about how they would have done the most. Like, this is kind of a tangent, but it has a lot to do with the jungle mid thing, is that I thought Cloud9's performance was very interesting because um, I was very critical of Jensen
Hmm.
and how he set up for contracts all last split. I
I
don't
think they've
think
gotten
they,
weirdly better at it this split, though.
yeah, no, they have. They
Hmm.
started to look better, I would say, last playoffs was when I really started to notice like visible improvement. But even then, Cloud9 have not been a very focused team in the early game. They cede a lot of
Hmm.
advantages. So the fact that they were getting like dragons uncontested or contracts was invading uncontested was very interesting to me because back in North America,
Right.
uh, and again, we touched on this before with the dragon thing where NA teams just love to fight a dragon.
Hmm.
Uh, Cloud9 looked like this early game powerhouse when they've been anything but in
Sure.
North America. And that, again, had a lot to do with playstyle matchup.
So, so I think we haven't really answered the question of whether or not NA are super good now. I do think that because I don't like the narrative that EU didn't take this seriously, or that EU weren't prepared, or that EU underperformed, because I think that is wrong. Uh, as someone who likes the European teams and likes it when they do well, I think you can see these flaws in the regular season games. So I don't think it's fair to say that at all. And I think Fnatic was aware of them going in because you see them trying to change up their playstyle a bit. I actually think that if Fnatic had just played mid priority, give Caps a strong matchup, they would have done better. But they decided to use this tournament in part to work on some stuff. So I think that you can say that right now NA have a better understanding of how to play the game, because I do think the jungle mid thing is huge. It's really important. So I think that that's enough to say that the NA teams at Rift Rivals at least have a better understanding of how to play the game than the European teams at Rift Rivals.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that right now it does feel like North America as a region is playing better than Europe, but it's like, again, you're only looking at the top when you say that, right? Because that's the only part that's really relevant anyway.
Yeah.
Um, okay, because I don't necessarily think that all of the NA teams have this figured out either, as we've already mentioned. But
Yeah. No.
we've already said that. Um, is P1 going to be good now? That's probably the next place that we're going to go, since we're still talking about North America and we talk much more about Cloud9 than TSM. What do you think about that?
Um, I think P1 are going to be a lot better now. So if they keep up what they did at Rift Rivals, which again, drawing bot lane pressure, having Ryu control mid lane with the lane push, and then Mike Young paying a lot more attention to the top side, I think that they will end up surpassing a lot of teams in the middle, because at the very least, even though Mike Young gets away with a lot, or at this tournament, right, he got away with some very overly eager a few ambitious plays, I guess, that he's not always going to get away with, and sometimes like teams will punish him for that, especially teams with better vision control through both sides of the river. But I think that at the very least, what Phoenix 1 showed that they haven't showed until most recently is that they have an identity that they can work off of now, which is so important, because I don't think that a lot of the middle of the pack North American teams necessarily have strong identities. So if Phoenix 1 can take what they did at this tournament and then kind of keep that up and perfect it, they will definitely move up in the standings. The question is more like, how much time do they have? Because if we're talking like what is good, I guess the question would be like, will they be able to make playoffs? And right now they're sitting at, I believe, 3-7. Yeah, they're at 3-7. Right? Yeah, they're tied for like 8-9 with FlyQuest. So you have in the middle, not including top 4, you have Dignitas, Envious, Echo Fox, P1, FlyQuest, and then Team Liquid at the very bottom with 2-8. I think having a strong identity will go very far with this kind of middle of the pack, where you have teams like Echo Fox or Envious or Dignitas that don't necessarily know how they want to play the game, where they want to apply pressure, how they can apply pressure better. I think these are a lot of teams with a lot of visible weaknesses, and just having a strong idea of what you want to do in game, which is something that I gave praise to Phoenix 1 last split, which is why it was so sad for me that they ended up being a dumpster fire in the beginning of this split. If they can find that and have it back, then they could make playoffs, I would say, because they might even be able to knock off a top team if they play at their best. The thing that will be, I think, the true test is when they go up against, let me check the remainder of their schedule. This week they play TSM and Dignitas. So the TSM series should be really interesting. Their series against Cloud9 in week 7 should be really interesting. And then they play CLG week 8 and TSM again week 9. So they have a lot of tough series against top teams coming up, and I do think it will require them to take out one of those teams if they start to falter at all. The way teams can abuse them is warding for those jungle invades that I mentioned from Mike Young, taking away some of the pushing champions from Ryu, or somehow destabilizing the bot lane. Because to your point, excuse me, something that Ryu has kind of struggled with historically is if he doesn't have strong side lanes, he kind of sometimes collapses if too much pressure is put mid.
I actually asked him about this week.
What did he say?
He's like, I've been playing for a while, so sometimes it's kind of hard to feel motivated. I was like, are you serious? Oh, good stuff for you. But now that, like, the team's doing well together and we're gelling, I think I feel motivated. I was like, okay, good.
At least he's honest, right?
Yeah.
My favorite Ryu-ism is still Koreans don't care about items.
Yeah. I don't know, he was very frank about a lot of things. It was actually one of my favorite interviews that I did, like low key. Especially since it's the third time I've interviewed him. And this time it was like his English is better each time, right?
Mhm.
And this time it was like he understood my questions and would start laughing. And then yeah, it was good. But I think that P1 for me, they have a lot of glaring signs is that if, like, the way that Mike was talking about this, it was just kind of like, this idea that he should take more risks. And that's kind of what he seemed to learn from this event.
No.
Is that you should just be aggressive and not have regrets. And I was like, you realize that these teams didn't even ward River when they had the push.
This is not what oh god, Kelsey, he learned all the wrong things.
He learned, like, this is the ultimate European mind game, right? We play, like, the European mind game, right? You play like shit, you forget mid-priority, you just play all scaling comps. You invite the top NA teams to come compete, and, and then you just let them free invade so that all of their young junglers, like, Contracts is young, Mike Young is pretty young. I guess Svenskeren isn't really young, but he was doing weird invades anyway, so it doesn't matter. You just teach
Svenskeren.
You just teach these guys like really bad habits, and then they show up at Worlds, and you have the time to improve your jungle mid synergy. Like Excel studies some mid lane matchups. Perk stops inting. No, I'm kidding. They just get better at picking drafts for pushing lanes, and then they ward out the river when they have mid control, and then suddenly the hotshot junglers that learned all the bad habits come back and they get punished for them. That's how it works. It's the ultimate mind game.
Nice. We'll have to see this play out at World.
No, but that's definitely my big alarm bell, is that he did do a lot of moves that he shouldn't get away with. Like, you shouldn't invade against pushing lanes, and a lot of the blind dragon contests, everything else that I think you would get away with against teams that didn't completely botch draft.
Which, weirdly enough, the one thing I can say that Phoenix One probably won't get away with are the blind dragon contests.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, as we've talked about, Dragon is a hot spot in NA for fighting, so
that's kind of my issue with Phoenix One. I think it'll be really interesting. I'm looking forward to their games this weekend. I'm really looking forward into, like, regular season after Rift Rivals. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah. I think, so my optimism for Phoenix One comes from the fact that they look more cohesive and decisive than a lot of other teams in that middle pack, right? Because we've seen Echo Fox, and I feel like
but even you come down to it, and the Echo Foxes aren't even really in contention for playoffs, so
yeah, I mean, they have a better
score,
right? They have a better record, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, is that Dig, I'm not sold on them. Envious, I'm not sold on them. Echo Fox, I'm not sold on them. FlyQuest, I'm not sold on them. So, I mean, I think Phoenix One definitely has the capacity to shoot up past those teams, especially if they can take a game off. I think it really will depend whether they can get an upset against, like, CLG, TSM.
Sure. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about EU. Do we think that there are any teams that could have done better at this tournament for Europe?
I'm going to have you start, because I can only think of one team, but I also don't know if you'll disagree with me, because their mid-game is not good.
I think if I wanted to send the teams that had the best understanding of jungle mid, I would send Misfits, H2K, and Vitality.
I was gonna say Misfits, but again, like they're mid.
I mean, I
They
think
do
that's not
some
fair. I think G2
weird.
kind of understand it. They just are really bad at executing it. And they can't balance pressure across the map even when they do it correctly. So they're better at it than, they have a better understanding of how the game should be played, I think, than uh, Fnatic and UOL. They're just not doing it well.
Yeah.
That's their big problem. But anyway,
And
yeah, I think those would be the teams I'd send for good jungle mid execution and synergy. But go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, the thing that struck me about G2 was that sometimes, specifically, and I don't want to necessarily single expect out because it's never a player thing, it's a team thing, but when they did try to transition early game advantages in top lane into their mid game, it was very shaky. And I think that was definitely so. Like, I'm still not convinced that, like, Trick wastes a lot of advantages that he has early, right? And then on top of that, a lot of the advantages that he was giving in their later games were to expect, and he was not performing well enough to make those advantages worth it, which was, in my opinion, like really unfortunate.
I mean, the really big thing is that they weren't really taking a lot off of his pressure. Maybe they got a couple red buffs, or they just weren't good at keeping the deep wards consistently refreshed, or anything like that. So I think that was a really big issue as well. I think that P1 had much more pressure just off of their lanes, like, casually winning. So
yeah. How do you think Misfits would have done at this tournament?
It's a really good question, because I know it's kind of funny, because I do know that, and people do who watch the broadcast also know that some of the NA teams were actually scrimming Misfits. So I think that's an interesting question, for sure. I think Misfits could have done pretty well. I think that their top jungle is okay. They don't necessarily give Power of Evil a lot of support, but they do have a good idea. Like, Maxlor is very intelligent about when he can and can't invade. They pick much stronger lanes. I think they could have done okay. I think they probably would have done better than G2, potentially better than Fnatic, who I think, on top of everything else, were just going through a crisis of conscience. UOL did well, sort of by virtue of teams blind picking mid, so feels like really gimmicky. So I'm not really sure how much better Misfits would have done overall. I just feel like they would have done potentially better. Definitely they still have mid-game issues, but I feel like some of the NA teams did as well. They were just really hard to punish because of how big the leads they got, so I think that would have been fun to see. H2K, I feel like they wouldn't have gotten as big of advantages as Misfits, because they definitely are cutting down on things, but if you look at the way that Odo Omna and Featherman prep waves, and the way that they play with the Yankos, I think it's actually really intelligent, and it's pretty good. Like, I would say that they are the team that, generally speaking, has the best idea in Europe of how to use mid and jungle with their lanes, but they don't really capitalize on it because they're playing with much worse lane matchups. So that's a little bit of a question mark as well, because I feel like they understand the fundamentals and the setups, but they're picking like their UOL, which is a little troublesome. So, I mean, I think you can get advantages from that, like if Yankos is able to take advantage of tempo and get ganks on lanes that are pushed in, and then they reverse the matchups that way, or Odo Omna snowball super far ahead, or they have better brand setups. So, I mean, to me, I think that H2K maybe had the best chance of doing well, because they can also abuse, at this point, some of the mid-game problems the NA teams have, so I think H2K would have had the best chance. And then, of course, Vitality, I think right now, in the past couple weeks, Nukeduck has actually just been playing out of his mind. So, I don't even think Yoko is that good. It's just that Misfits is playing stupidly well. Or Nukeduck is playing stupidly well on all sorts of, and winning matchups he's not supposed to win, and they've been playing off of that pressure a lot, really well, and it's won the matches that they shouldn't necessarily win. So I think that those are probably the teams that I thought maybe could have put up a fight. I don't think that they would necessarily win Rift Rivals, but I think it would have been a less, oh, okay, all of these EU teams are making the same mistake type of tournament, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, do we feel like the remaining EU teams, or the EU teams that went to Rift Rivals, will take something away and improve? I'm not sure if we talked about this on another episode yet.
I think we kind of hinted at it.
We at least talked about it together. But
yeah. I know we talked about, so previously we talked about G2, and even going back as far as, I don't know how much crossover there is between this and League Weekly. I'd assume if you are watching this, you probably watch League Weekly as well. But we've spoken about G2 on League Weekly, and when they first started having trouble, should we continue believing in them as a top team? And I think now the answer is definitely no, but even at that time we were like, no, we can't anymore.
Yeah, I said I don't think we can say they'll you can predict with a straight face that they'll win Europe, for sure.
Yeah. So I think with G2, for me, they're the most frustrating team in this equation to me, because I think they have smart players. I think that
their mistakes are int. Like, it's actually really sad that their mistakes are basically just inting.
Yeah, and like you see, so like even at this tournament, the one game they won, they roamed with Mithy's Blitzcrank. They were actually setting up like good vision, which is something that they had massive issues with in all of their other games.
They adapted to drafting for pushing lanes in mid-priority.
Yeah, like, so you have one game like that, and then you have all of their other games where their draft is wonky, or they don't capitalize on early opportunities, even when they do get those advantages, like the points I already made about Trick and Expect. And that is not something that I think can be fixed easily, but I can't say it won't be for a lack of trying, because I do think that G2 will go back and they'll be like, what went wrong? How do we fix this? I just don't know if they will be able to.
The problem is that G2 know what's wrong. I think they're aware of what's wrong, and it's obvious to them, but they just are having trouble fixing it, and that's the frustrating thing, because I feel like Fnatic don't understand mid-priority. Like, so someone explains it to them, and I'm sure they could figure it out, and with that roster they could probably play to it pretty well, but...
I mean, for Fnatic, it's so weird for me, because I think one of the reasons why they moved away from even focusing on mid-priority is because they had... they're such a strong... So, like, back when they decided to go for the 80 Kennen, when they started looking really good at the end of the split, and they kind of took their own destiny in their hands. I think that a lot of that had to do with their attention to side lanes. So what they learned from that is that, you know, mid-priority isn't as important if we are able to play the side lanes well.
The reason why they could get away with that is because Caps was just winning lanes.
Yeah, that's true too.
I think that they were playing like with strong mid matchup and priority on strong mid matchup all the way until the Rockout loss. And that's when they're like, okay, what are we screwing up? Because they lost to teams that forced mid on them with better scaling comps when they were in side lane. Because they kept... The way Fnatic play is that they like to do picks on side lanes and mid to late. And that left mid lane vulnerable to getting engaged on by like your Jarvans and a bunch of other high engaged champs that are much more popular this split and much more successful this split because of the way the laning phase is and some of the itemization changes. Dora shield. But so it's a lot easier for them to get group engaged on mid And with all these teams playing high scaling comps, if you screw up your sideline engages, you lose. So I think that was a big problem, and Fnatic haven't figured out how to fix it. They're like, oh, we need to pick better scaling champions. No. That's not what you take from that. No. I think that's why you see this shift from Fnatic, like in their games leading up to their series against Splice. I think they had a really good read on the quote-unquote EU meta, where they were pushing to river, grouping mid, looking for engage, pushing to river, grouping mid, looking for engage, instead of doing the 1-3-1s and stuff that they were doing before. And I think that kind of let them down a little bit at this tournament. So.
And then there's UOL.
Oh, goody. I think that UOL also know what they're doing wrong, and they also know how to fix it, weirdly enough. But I'm not sure if they will, because it really does come down to Exile being able to understand better mid matchups. And if you look at the history of UOL, it just feels like there isn't the resources on that team to really teach mid laners about mid matchups. I don't know if it's like a sheepy thing or what, but mid laners, like PoE had a very fixed pool when he was on UOL. Exile, so I just kind of question their ability to get over it. So I think you have 3 situations where it's like understanding what you're doing wrong and having the ability to fix it, but maybe just not doing it, which is the UOL case. Fnatic, which is not understanding what you're doing wrong and having the ability to fix it, and then G2's case, which is understanding what you're doing wrong and not really being able to fix it. So
yeah, I mean, I think in UOL's case at this tournament, even we saw them just kind of double down on what has been successful for them, and it worked up until a point. So, I mean, it's hard. Like, it's hard for me. Like, I would hope that they take a lot from this and kind of try to improve. And Exile takes a look at how mid lane was used by his opponents and studies different matchups. But I also think that their tendency has already been shown to just go with what they like or is comfortable for them, but harder.
And I talked to you all the most this week because they do loser interviews, and also because I saw their owner for the final and talked to him for a little bit. But it's just definitely the consensus seems to be this is just something that the players will default to, and you can't really shake it out of them, is that like they will default to ultra comfort when stuff starts going wrong. And that really, to me, halts their ability to develop and grow and become a really strong team. So, yeah, it's a little bit depressing. We'll see how these teams snap out. We might see some sort of major shakeups to get stuff going. But I think Fnatic is probably the one team of the 3 that I feel sort of the most confident in. So hopefully they get it together.
Woo!
Yeah, thank you guys for watching Making the Rounds. We'll see if we do anything for the regular season or if we're just going to do this kind of stuff for special events. I don't know. We have literally never brought this up until this moment. Anyway, have fun.
I'm sorry for my illness.